Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this, our third part of our series on centering equity, the importance of cultural humility in ICWA cases. I'm Adria Cortes with the National Council, and I am so glad to see everyone here today. The session today is going to focus on data collection and use. You can see our other parts of the series, the first two, on our website, on our ICWA Court website, and I'll put the link to that in the chat. This presentation is developed under a grant from the State Justice Institute, and the points of view expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the State Justice Institute. With funding from SJI, the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges, we recruited judicial court sites to engage in targeted resource mapping around opioids and the effect of opioids and other substance use disorders in children and families in state court. We have those resources available on our website, and we will put that link in the chat as well, and welcome you to visit and ask if you have any questions, and we can assist you in any way in this resource mapping. Today, we are going to expand that conversation with the group that we have. My colleague Sheldon Spotted Elk will get us started in just a moment. But today's learning objectives are to understand the role of centering equity for tribal families facing substance use disorders, discuss ways in which court teams work with data to improve outcomes for children and families, and identify ways to review what data is collected and how it is collected. We hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation that we can continue to have on these topics. We welcome you to put thoughts and questions and best practices that you're doing right now in the chat as we go along. And I will be monitoring the chat, and as well as Stephanie and Sheldon. So with that, I will turn it over to Sheldon Spotted Elk.
Thank you, Adria. Thank you so much. And thank you, Stephanie, for opening us up. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, wonderful. This is the third of the three-part series that we're doing on centering equity. So far, we've really had a great opportunity to profile a lot of the innovation that's happening in ICWA courts. And I'm especially excited about today's conversation because we get to profile Pima County ICWA Court. And they've had some great success. You're going to learn a little bit about the uniqueness of Pima County and their engagement with tribes. One of the big aspects of ICWA courts is actually the number one aspect, I feel like, is tribal engagement. And hopefully we can model that for you. Another principle of ICWA courts is data collection. So we'd hopefully monitor that as well, or model that as well. So with that, I'm going to have everybody just do quick introductions, if that's okay. And we'll just go down we'll start with you, Judge, and Christina, if that's okay.
Oh, hi, my name is Christine Andrews, and I am Hiachirautam. I am a member of the Banawakam Nation, and I have a background in law with my JD, but I also have a background in public health, and I can talk more about that later, but I am Judge Quigley's law clerk.
Actually, she's my partner. We couldn't do this without her. Hi, I'm Kathleen Quigley, and I'm a judge here in Pima County, and I'm one of the ICWA court judges here. I was previously presiding judge. I was very much of a proponent of getting the ICWA court started in 2018, and it launched in 2020 here. And we've been very thankful. We have a wonderful collaborative ICWA court team, and Christina is actually a key component of that.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Alfred Urbina.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fred Urbina. I am the Attorney General for the Pascua Yaqui Tribe. I previously served as an associate judge for our tribe, and I have both practiced as a reservation attorney at the prosecutor's office, managing our child welfare caseload. I currently help manage our ICWA caseload, both in Pima County and Maricopa County and across the country. Thank you.
Great. Rachel.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Buck. I am the Court and Calendar Services Supervisor here at Pima County Juvenile Court. I've been working with ICWA Court since we launched, And I do the case management and data collection to help dependency cases, as well as helping identify and collect ICWA court data.
Laura.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Hunter. I'm the program evaluator for Pima County Juvenile Court. So my involvement in the project has really been to do some evaluation and data analysis on ICWA Court in Pima County.
Laura, as you can see from our panel, we have such diversity, and hopefully we can engage in such a deep and enriching conversation. You can see a lot about the coordination of how data is being collected, the evaluation of it, tribally led, and then we can see it from the judicial standpoint as well. So I'm really excited about this conversation. As you guys of course know, in your guys' work, is that ICWA has been called the gold standard of child welfare before, and I feel like there's a value set that we find within ICWA. I think these concentric circles oftentimes, for me at least, illustrate what that value set is that we try to put a child inside these concentric circles of connection to family, relatives, and community and culture. And I do want to start off, and I know that we'll start off with Pascua Yaqui, Attorney General Fred Urbina. I know you guys are collecting ICWA data, and that's kind of you share it. It's online actually, and I think might have a link, and I could put it in the chat box. But the Pascua Yaqui Tribe's been collecting ICWA data for a while now. And so as a tribe, how do you guys use that data to inform practice? And that'll be the next question is just really like there is an elephant in the room when we talk about data collection is oftentimes in Black and Brown communities. We've had data researchers come into our communities and do research on us. And very often, sometimes it's to our peril. And very often it doesn't necessarily benefit our communities. And so we want to make sure that we're squaring that cultural relevance into this conversation as well. So first question to you, Fred, about Pascua Yaqui collecting data.
Sure, thank you, Sheldon. Well, for us, managing both the on-reservation child welfare cases and handling some of the criminal matters, it was about 10 years ago where we started to look at this issue a little closer regarding data. I was speaking to a victim representative in a homicide case, and we were headed to sentencing at the time. And the conversation, drifted over to the defendant and sentencing, and the victim, the sister of the victim, basically told me, well, I don't really blame the defendant for what happened because he was in our child welfare system. And I was managing those cases at the time, and I started to ask questions about what does that mean? What do we have to do if this is an outcome in one of our cases? And so I started to dig into our adult criminal cases, both off reservation and on reservation, and started to recognize that a lot of the people that we were seeing were former child welfare children. And so we basically took our cases and we looked at all our closed cases and started to cross-tabulate some data from Pima County, the state of Arizona, the Pascua Yaqui Tribe, and we recognized a pattern. And my presentation to council was like, as the parent of these children, we're likely not doing a better job than the parents we removed the kid from in the first place. And so we really had to go back and start to look at what the data is telling us, and not just look at, close case outcomes. We really had to start to figure out what we were doing in the context of our cases on res and off res, and how we can better serve kids in care. And what does that mean from a cultural standpoint? Why are we not having the impact that we want to see if we're supposed to be keeping kids safe? And if we developed a system where we had additional cultural underpinnings in everything we do, from how we operate in cases to information we deliver to kids and families in care, perhaps our outcomes would be better when we're looking at different data points.
Wow, so it sounds like it's helped make your office and your tribal community more trauma informed when it comes to the aspects of justice, even criminal justice in that way.
Absolutely, it's all connected, and that's a good way to put it, more of a trauma-informed family approach.
Is there any, if I was a tribal council member or if I was a tribal attorney general and we currently aren't doing it, what encouragement would you provide to me if I'm watching this webinar here?
Well, I would say that you have to understand what's happening with your kids. There's a couple of different ways to do that. You're representing the community. It's your responsibility to understand these things, to charge your various departments and attorneys and ICWA practitioners to find out how you're doing this. ICWA is based on the tribal's culture and the tribal's families. And if you're not seeing that reflected in your program, then you definitely have some work to do. But it's not something that you're not already doing. It's just something you have to add into a state system and state program so that you're doing what you're already doing, but you're actually implementing it in another jurisdiction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know sometimes the aspects of so much of the history of that has been about colonizing and approaching the way that we think, but I appreciate what you're pointing out here, Fred, about the values within ICWA, our tribal values actually, and then the measurement of it isn't necessarily a colonized thing. There's a way of decolonizing that data. Christina, I'll go to you as any thoughts on this and how have they done it at Tohono O'odham? I know you used to work for Tohono O'odham before you came over to be the clerk. So same question or question for you.
Okay, so one thing, and this is from a perspective, yes, of working for the Tohono O'odham Nation when I was Executive Director of Health and Human Services, but I also was at the University of Arizona's Research and Training Center. So we worked on research and how to deal with tribes nationally. So with that, those two perspectives, I just wanted to add that in dealing with tribes, one thing to really consider is knowing that each tribe is different. There's tribes that are okay with dealing with outsiders, and I want to say Pascua Yaqui is one of them. They're really wonderful. And then you have other tribes that are more, they don't like dealing with outsiders. And I want to say the Tohono O'odham Nation is one of those tribes. It sits on 2.8 million acres of land. There's 75 miles that borders Mexico in the United States. And they live in villages, very traditional homes. I'll give you an example. You'll have on the nation, you might have a faucet that might be in a village where people will get the running water because they don't have indoor plumbing. And that's similar to like the Navajo Nation. You're going to see they're not very willing to deal a lot with outsiders. So just remember that one tribe, when you say tribe, they're all very, very different. And one thing to know about data is the tribes, they have data for the most part, but they don't like to share for the most part. Pascua Yaqui is definitely a gold standard, to be honest with you. They definitely are taking the lead in sharing data. Most tribes want to have a say in what data will be collected and by whom and how it will be used. And some tribes, you have to remember, have a human subjects review board that you have to go through in order to get data. The Tohono O'odham Nation has a human subject review board, which I was a part of when I was there. Also knowing that for the most part, the tribes, they want to make sure that they have oversight and say of that data, especially when you're dealing with their members. I wanted to bring a situation that happened in 2004 with the Havasu Pai when a university had used their blood. And it was only to look at diabetes, but they ended up using the blood to look at other DNA stuff and to do other research of other diseases that this tribe had and that could, they wanted like say all the tribes were like that. Well, the tribe wasn't aware, nor did the tribe give their consent. So this is in the ears of many tribes, and I'm speaking on the Nation in particular. So when we think about a tribe, and again, I am speaking on behalf of the Nation, that blood is so sacred for these tribes. When we talk about opioids and the other data that might be collected, which might be hair samples or might be nails, you have to have that cultural humility to say, for a tribe, at least for the Tohono Nation, the hair, the blood, and the nails are so sacred, and they may feel like you're going to take that and do black magic on them. And so you can't just go take pictures. You can't just, there's things that are very culturally sacred to the tribe. So very cognizant of that. And it kind of leads me into the cultural humility when dealing with tribes in general. Trust and relationships are definitely a key. But when we talk about cultural humility, you have to think about where the tribes come from in terms of their traditions, their ways of thinking, their ideas. That has been instilled in them from time immemorial. You think about the United States, it's only been here for 249 years. I mean, you look at the two differences here. And due to colonization, where there was a huge genocide on the Native Americans, I would say 95% of them have been extinct. And I say this personally because I'm Hiacharotam. In 1851, yellow fever hit my tribe, and only 4 families survived that colonization. So when you think about cultural humility, you have to think where these people are coming from, where I'm coming from. That doesn't just go away, it lives in us. And that's something you need to really consider when you're dealing with the tribe, is that also, when you build trust with them, it's important to definitely have the cultural humility, but for us here at Pima County, we made sure that, we knew that relationships were important. And when you deal with data, it may not be like, oh, it's going to be easy to get. You may want to get somebody from that community who looks like the community, comes from that community, who's able to, the tribe would be able to trust and know that data is not going to be taken and done with like what happened to the Havasu tribe. And that's going to take time. So when you talk about data, it truly is a miracle that Pima County has gotten data so quickly, but you're going to see a lot of resistance from dealing with tribes, and that makes sense due to their historical trauma. So I would start early. I would meet with the leaders. I would meet with the tribes, because the tribal members are going to believe and respect their tribal leaders. So you need to make those appointments. And like I said, if you want to cut that time, hire somebody from that community. One thing also when dealing with tribes and data, make sure you're honest. Don't change in the course of things that we're going to do X and then you end up doing Y, because that will definitely lose their confidence and trust in you. And it will be close to impossible to try to regain or build that relationship back up. So those are just some things that I consider, and I say these are my thoughts respectfully. So thank you.
I appreciate you putting all that out there. That's really important. I feel like it should frame the way that we have this conversation. I appreciate you putting that at the very front end here, because there's so much to really think about and digest. If I was going to start tomorrow to collect ICWA data, I think you're laying out a good roadmap and a good framework to really think about that. Pima County, I know you guys have been in ICWA Court for a while now. What's some of the outcomes that you guys have had so far? How have you guys used a cultural informed lens to measure that? And then if you would allow one more kind of over context to that question, if ICWA Court is the gold standard, if ICWA is the gold standard and ICWA courts are aiming at complying with ICWA on the highest levels, should you be able to get better results, and should we be able to measure those better results? And so, and how have you guys done on that? So I'll open that question up with you, Judge Quigley and Laura and Rachel. Please fill in.
Let me just start. I'll just give a very brief overview and then turn to Laura and Rachel. But one of the things that we've done in our development of our ICWA court is really, in my opinion, it's not just an ICWA court. I call it an ICWA collaborative. And I think that's really important key, because having the tribes and the nations at the table is crucial. If we don't have them, then we're just on an island trying to do what we can do, but we need their input, their participation. We are so thankful that Pascua Yaqui has been willing to provide their data. That helps inform our data, frankly, and lets us understand if we are actually, we can compare our data and see if it's similar. We also have put our data on a front-facing website on our courts, juvenile courts website, to be able to share that data, and some of what we're going to share today will be able to be there. But we also have 29 tribes that we're working with our collaborative. There's 3 that in particular we're working closest with, and those are our biggest cases, and that's the Pascua Yaqui Tribe, the Tololo Nation, as well as the Navajo Nation. And we really want their input and their help on this, and because it's really about their children. And so some of the data that we're looking to collect, some of it's being hand counted, frankly, and I think that's really a tribute to Rachel and her team, as well as to Laura putting that together. And so I'm going to turn to them to share some of the data that we've been collecting.
I'll chime in real quick, and then Laura can share with you our highlights and the actual data that we've collected and analyzed. Some of this information really comes down to what Christina was talking about in her introduction as well, was that we really collaborated with these tribes and we had cultural training. So we had lunches and training opportunities to learn more about the different tribes, which enhanced our connection and collaboration to know how we could improve in working on our ICWA court cases. And some of the highlights, really is even, we kind of talked about beforehand, was identifying a case as ICWA. So even starting from the beginning and working along with DCS or the AG's office and petitioners to find out if this is an ICWA court case and assigning them to an ICWA court judge, collecting that information to identify as soon as possible, getting that verification from the tribes to really find out whether or not this is an ICWA court case, so we can really capture that path and information to collect them and put them in that path towards the ICWA court information. And collaborative really is to look at what are we collecting, what do we want to collect, and how can we improve that, and what is actually needed by not only the court, but our collaborative stakeholders. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura, and she can kind of show you some of the highlights of what we've been able to collect through those different variety of avenues.
Thank you. And I know data may not always be a really exciting topic for everyone, but I actually love data and program evaluation because it's really an opportunity to tell a story, and data can be powerful and persuasive. So I think it's really exciting, and I've been really excited to be part of this particular project, particularly because it has been incredibly and deeply collaborative, with information shared kind of at each stage of the evaluation process, from just the planning process through the actual analysis, and then the results, and sharing those, getting feedback on next steps. How can we contextualize these results? What is meaningful to look at in the first place? So I've really appreciated that. For this experience, it hasn't been, should we share the results? It has been, the question has really been, when we share the results. So the default assumption has been this information sharing, rather than the default assumption is, we might share this. So that's been really exciting, that collaboration has really built into the system here and built into the culture here. And so when we talk about program evaluations, telling a story, I think that collaboration has made it a shared storytelling. So even though I'm the one who's kind of crunched the numbers, I have had much less impact on the evaluation than others because of the collaborative. So what we've started to look at is really looking at a lot of case outcomes. So looking at time to case closure, outcomes at case closure. So being placed with parents or relatives or other placements. Looking at time to first permanency hearing. So how quickly are people moving through the system? And it's been really exciting because we've looked at both, comparing ICWA dependencies with non-ICWA dependencies, and we took a cohort approach because we really wanted to isolate the impact of ICWA court. And the sample size is pretty small, given that ICWA Court was implemented relatively recently, but we're still seeing significant results, even on these small sample sizes. So what we see is that after ICWA Court started, the time to case closure was significantly reduced for ICWA dependencies. And it's really interesting here because when we look before ICWA Court and look at non-ICWA and ICWA dependencies, ICWA dependencies took significantly longer to reach case closure than non-ICWA dependencies. But then the reverse is true after ICWA Court. So now ICWA dependencies actually close faster than non-ICWA dependencies. So these are really promising results of the impact of our ICWA Court. We also saw that the placement with parents significantly increased after the implementation of ICWA Court, and time to first permanency hearing was significantly reduced for ICWA dependencies too. So we see very positive trends.
I guess then, and I appreciate you guys actually using that word collaborative. That really strikes me as, I want to steal that. So I feel like I reflect on Bert Hirsch, who's one of the 3 lawyers that put pen to paper, and I share this quote often, is that he shared with me that ICWA, after all, is just black words on a piece of paper. You know, it takes actually human beings. It takes a collaborative, to steal your guys' words, to really make it and effectuate the highest aims of the spirit of that law. I guess, Laura, back to you just really quick, is what were some of the cultural considerations that informed your practice and informed your collaboration on telling this story? And I like that you said storytelling, because I come from a storytelling tradition, so I appreciate you saying that as well. But what were some of the cultural considerations?
So I think for us, and this was already kind of mentioned, that it was deeply collaborative throughout. So we shared with internal and external stakeholders. So that was the default assumption. We got feedback early on in the process from the collaborative, from the Casey Foundation, that really shaped how we would present the results, how we can contextualize the results. I don't think we wanted to say, you know, I'd never wanted to come in and say, this is your story. This was really providing the data and learning from others about how can we contextualize this? Why is this meaningful? What can we say from this? And really the ultimate outcome is really to better improve the services and the experiences for those we serve, but listening kind of to listening to the stakeholders in when we present this. And then it's an iterative process. So throughout this, we've shared this kind of multiple times now, quite a bit. Each time we've had really great questions that will really shape how we go back, do some additional analyses, particularly when we get more data. So I think it's kind of recognizing the powerful experiences and stories of others, rather than trying to shape the story that we tell.
Great, thank you, Laura, appreciate that. And there's a question in the chat, and so I'm kind of diverge just a little bit from the questions that we had on the slide here, but the question in the chat from Judge Spear Moss, she's asking about just kind of the process, and I think it gives us an opportunity to really talk about some of the behind the scenes. And this is a question I get to work with some of the ICWA courts, with all of the ICWA courts. And so the question sometimes is about the court administration aspect, which is usually behind a closed door. You know, we don't necessarily see what court administration does to make sure that ICWA court flows and is smooth. But when does a case start as an ICWA case in your guys' jurisdiction and comes into the collaborative? And how do you guys, is there a certain day that ICWA court happens on? I know there's a lot of ICWA cases in Pima County, so how do you guys divided that among judges, and what does that practice kind of look like on the ground to kind of give our listeners a better informed view of how this looks?
Well, I'll start off, and then Rachel can talk about her team's effort. So when we were developing the ICWA Court Collaborative, it was like trying to figure out how to do this. So initially, we had one ICWA Court judge, and then we had I was the backup ICWA Court judge, and I took any ICWA cases that Judge McDonald couldn't take. And we tried to funnel the cases, but we're also a one family, one court model. And so we knew that we just couldn't take every ICWA case that was ongoing and just put it onto Judge McDonald's calendar or my calendar. That just wouldn't be fair to families that have been working with the judge for a period of time. So what we started doing was all cases that were identified as ICWA at the initial, at the time the petition was filed, and Rachel can talk about how their team looks at that, or cases that where there was a reason to know, we gave to the ICWA court judge. Undetermined could stay with another judge until it was determined that it was actually an ICWA or reason to know. And then what we also did was we, as judges rotate off our bench, because we're a rotating bench, we would take all the ICWA cases from that rotating judge and move it to an ICWA court judge. We now have a process that we're going to be starting really, it's a little bit informal, but we're going to formalize it in January, is that when a case is undetermined and it's determined then later to be ICWA, then we're asking another judge to assign it to an ICWA court judge. And we've now added a third ICWA court judge. Now, it doesn't mean that all my cases are ICWA, but I would say the majority of them tend to be now, and the other ICWA court judge as well, the three of us. But we are the ones that specialize in the ICWA cases, and we try to keep that because a lot of the other judges don't really understand as much because they're not as indoctrinated how to really work with the families, the tribes, et cetera. So that's how we're doing it. And if it's a reason to know, or it is ICWA because that's been determined already, or the tribe intervenes early, it goes to the ICWA court collaborative. Rachel?
Yeah, so in the beginning, the way our dependency case process starts here is that if it's a DCS case, the Department of Child Safety will call in a removal and schedule their first court hearing. And at that time, one of the questions on our intake sheet process is to ask them if the child is ICWA or eligible to enroll in any tribe. And so a lot of the times they'll say no, or they're not sure. And so luckily, working with our judicial administration, we were able to have now 3 ICWA court judges. So especially if there's possibly ICWA, we will launch that straight into the ICWA court and let the judge make that determination. And so that's been able to kind of encapsulate making sure that they start ICWA court more often than not. And then the judge can make that determination. We also have expanded our program now where we have attorneys from various agencies or contract dependency attorneys who have identified interest in working on ICWA court. So not only do we have ICWA court judges, but we also have attorneys who have agreed and have interest and identified interest in working on these ICWA court cases, learning about the culture, the resources available, connecting with the tribes. So we have quite a few ICWA attorneys as well, which is really exciting. And we started off with maybe a handful, and now we had like 10 to 15. And so the more we've been rolling out, the more interest that we've been able to garner, and we have more interest. And so with that, what we did for behind the scenes to accommodate attorneys who were interested in working on these ICWA court cases, we shared our calendar, our schedule for our 3 ICWA judges that talks about this is when an ICWA PPH may fill. So we have a standard block for what our preliminary protective hearing. And so the judge has, for example, like Judge Quickly could have that she has a PPH every Thursday, every other week, and every other Monday. So we put together a schedule with the dates and times of the ICWA court judges blocks, and I've shared that with our collaborative and the ICWA attorneys as well, so that way they know if we do get a petition that could be ICWA coming in, this is the date that would be filled. So that way it's able to kind of accommodate some of their time frame to get them in there, so that way they're able to have that time available to take on this new case. So those are some of the behind the scenes ways that we've moved cases into ICWA, but Judge Quigley is right. We didn't want to interrupt the families in the beginning. So it's been a learning lesson as we've grown. For example, historically, if a case reactivated, if it came back into dependency care, we would look to see which judge did they have previously and try to reassign that family with the judge. But now if they're an ICWA court case, we will try to reassign that to an ICWA court judge so we can have a lot of our ICWA cases in ICWA court. The other aspect about the behind the scenes is that collection of tribal information. So a lot of the times, there can be a delay in identifying whether or not the child is eligible to enroll or a member of a tribe. So like Judge Quigley mentioned, we will have those paperwork and documents, maybe at a later date or later hearing, to collect whether or not the child is eligible and part of a member of an ICWA court, ICWA tribe. So we review those documents and update our case management system as soon as possible. And we also work on adding the tribes as interveners in our case management system to ensure that they can get on distribution, so that the way they're getting all of the same documents and information on these cases to really be part of the ICWA court collaboration.
And Rachel, as she brought up the attorneys, we have AGs, we have children's counsel, contract counsel, parents counsel, et cetera, as well as our attorney offices that all have attorneys that are interested in ICWA court. And it's amazing, our collaborative has grown. I think at our general collaborative meeting, we have close to 50 people.
And Judge Quigley, I believe you also helped, DCS now also has an ICWA unit as well, if that's correct?
As a result of the development of the ICWA court, we were sort of like, build it and they will come, and DCS did, and now they have DCS caseworkers that are assigned to ICWA cases, which has made a huge difference, I think, anecdotally, working with the tribes and nations.
It's such an incredible story. It sounds like the ICWA court has been, or the ICWA collaborative has been a catalyst for change in your guys' community. So that sounds really powerful and inspiring. I appreciate you sharing all that information about the inquiry stage, you know, the reason to know stage, if you will, of the ICWA case. And I think sometimes all throughout the country, it seems like that's an area of practice and an area of struggle sometimes. And even in the ICWA courts, that is an area of practice and struggle sometimes to really capture that and make sure you're treating it as an ICWA case until you find out it's not, you know. So I appreciate you sharing that great information. I know early in the formation of your ICWA court, you guys had a learning series. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about that. It'd be great to hear from you, Christina and Alfred. And then I also want to just kind of open it up to, I know a lot has been said so far, but open it up to you guys to respond to each other because a lot of good information has been provided. But tell us a little bit about that learning series, Christina and Fred. I feel like I think I attended all of them, actually. It seems like the most popular one. Even I was a trainer at one of them. But even way more popular than anything that anybody did was the tribal ones. I feel like they had the highest, like everybody was like engaged in that, you know? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Sheldon, the ICWA court started around January 2020, and I had come on December 2020. And the thing is that we had these trainings, and something that I've never, in my experience working with tribes over 20 some years, I've never seen them say, hey, this is my culture. These are my values. These are my cultural values. These are how we see our children and our families. And that was amazing to me, even the openness that the Pascua Yaqui Tribe and the Nation had in saying, hey, we value our children so much, and we're seeing that you guys value us so much. So we're going to be vulnerable here, and we're going to open up our culture and value systems because we know you guys, so we can build those relationships, and you guys will see and hopefully understand where we're coming from. So we have these training series, and I believe Pascua Yaqui had 3 or 4 of them, and they talked about, and the Nation the same. And they talked about their values in child rearing and things that were important to them. And also what I liked was their services that they talked about. And they shared that, because a lot of times when the child is taken there, you know, or off the nation, or off the reservation, I should say, they lose that contact with their families or their culture. So you began to see that there's this relationship that was being built. So that's how we started off. And then once the Pascua Yaqui presented, the Nation presented, and then we started moving into like judges. Judge Humitoa, who is the United States District Judge for the District of Arizona, she came and talked about her experience as the first Native American District Court Judge. From coming from a Hopi background and trying to, and also we had a Senator Gonzalez who also came and spoke, and they talked about the intersection between the tribal, the state, and the federal court system, and using their Judge Humitoa was like using her Hopi background to try to explain the importance and how a tribe sees their children, because a tribe would see their children 7 generations forward, and they know how valuable they are, and they don't want to lose that because that's losing themselves. So with that, those training series, I think, were very educational from the tribal perspective and from the court and the attorney section. And it created synergy, and it created cultural humility. And I just wanted to say that. And right now, we continue with those, working with the AOC here and bringing more knowledge about tribes and to the courts. So that's about the trainings. So they're very, very strong, very important.
And I would like to make an offer. If anybody is interested in participating in our training, Zoom, we use Zoom or Teams depending on who's sponsoring, but we actually now collaborated with our AOC and our court improvement project, and they sponsor some of our trainings, and they actually have paid for some of the speakers. That's been really helpful. We had NICWA presented on QEWs. We had up to 200 people on. And so we have expanded across the country, and we invite people. So if you're interested in participating in our trainings, they happen monthly. Generally speaking, you are welcome. We'll invite you. And if you're able to attend, they're over our lunch hour. But and we're looking at having another very inspiring closing in April or May of this year from our ICWA presentations. But we found them to be helpful. And just send an email to me or to Sheldon, and he'll let us know, and we will add you to our invite list, and you are welcome to participate.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate that. I do. One of the questions coming back to some evaluation here about nationally, we know a lot of cases, I think it's 2/3 of cases that arrive in child welfare are related to neglect. The primary reason for neglect is oftentimes substance use disorder or opioid use disorder. Do those numbers, do you guys find the same type of dynamic in your community with the ICWA courts? And if you do, what are some of the impacts and considerations that you have on those types of cases?
Well, I would say from a service perspective, and this is where I will tell you that the collaboration has been so impactful, is that because we are working more closely with the tribes and oftentimes the culturally appropriate services, that we are getting more and more information about what services that the Department of Child Safety can refer families to that are culturally appropriate or sensitive, either through the tribe or nation or somebody that they're aware of. In fact, at our last collaborative, there was a meeting about who we could, so we've identified even one more service provider that would provide culturally sensitive treatment for the family. And now actually we were talking on the way to Tamara Walters' retirement at Pascua Yaqui, and I think Christina brought up the idea of maybe having some treatment providers come from the tribes and talk about recommendations for services for families. And I think this has been a huge impact for us. And it really just comes from the collaboration.
I was just going to say, when she talks about treatment providers, they're native treatment providers that have spiritual, traditional ways of trying to walk them through their journey in this point in their life. So, and they've realized how successful the rate is by having these individuals who have the substance abuse, how much more successful they are in this lost time in their journey of life. So I just wanted to point that out. So we do have a list, and we've given it to DCS, to all the attorneys that Rachel had mentioned and Judge had mentioned. We're hoping that will be the second to the last training, which are going to be a panel of the traditional healers that are going to talk about substance abuse that Native Americans have on the reservation or off the reservation. So that's what we're working on right now. And we were working with Pascua Yaqui and the Thonot Nation, their attorneys and their ICWA units that they have there. And so we're all on board of doing that. So
I would like to have the historical trauma aspect too, so that people truly understand that.
Well, so it sounds like the data that you've collected has really helped inform culturally relevant services and making sure that they match. Am I understand that correctly? That's wonderful. Rachel, I saw you come off. Are you going to add something to that?
Yeah, I was going to add a quick cultural understanding as well, because this was, I saw this in a hearing once, even before we started ICWA court. But again, you know, substance abuse is one of the top reasons that we do see these dependency cases coming in the system. And the Department of Child Safety was asking the mother to do a drug test, and they were wanting to do a hair follicle drug test. And the mother said that she would do a drug test, but she objected to the hair follicle test because, and like Christina mentioned earlier, you know, the hair, the nails, that's very sacred. And so having someone taking their hair, especially someone who just came in and removed your children and giving them your hair, that's not culturally accepted. So even looking at this data, and we're looking at substance abuse and opioids, you know, how you're asking them to collect that data, collect that information to go through the system is really a consideration to take into place too. What are all the alternatives that you can do to collect this information?
Thank you so much. I know some of the values too within the ICWA courts are proximity, and I say that in the most general sense. Brian Stevenson, one of the famous children's lawyers out there, he talks about the proximity, the power of proximity, you know, is that when we're actually close to something, we're more informed. What, in your guys' experience, or maybe you guys have some interviews from families as a data point, how has this actually impacted, do you feel like, families and children that are appearing before you on a daily basis, or families or children that are living in Tucson that are connected to Tohono and Pascua Yaqui? Are there some data points that you guys could share about that? And so just kind of a general open question, anybody that feel free to open and answer that question.
I don't know that, I think one of the data points that we're looking at is, that we don't quite have yet, but we want, is the ICWA compliant placement. We're looking at that data point. I will say anecdotally, I have seen the caseworkers from the Department of Child Safety take a very different approach on these cases, and they really collaborate with the social worker from the tribe if they intervene. If the tribe doesn't intervene, which they often do, we really invite the social workers from the tribes to participate. We send them the minute entries. We ensure DCS provides them all disclosure always on this. And so, but what I've seen is, that as Laura pointed out, cases are closing a little faster sometimes. Children are returned to the families more often. And the cases used to, in ICWA cases, would sometimes go on for 2+ years. We're not having, I mean, some cases obviously do, but we're having much better success with closing with family and closing in an appropriate way, and making sure that we have even better active efforts for these families to help support them and support the children.
Thank you.
I'll just mention quickly, Sheldon, that we have started to do some interviews. We are collecting qualitative information from children who've been in the system. They might have been pre-ICWA court. So I think we'll be able to evaluate going forward the impact, but Judge Quigley is right. The actual process from notice to case closure, it's speeding up our outcomes, our case closures. We're having, you know, when they're placed with relatives, they're more likely to work on their case plan. These are things that I think you can start to compare other cases to these actual cases that are currently in the ICWA court to kind of have some more hard data. But anecdotally, like Judge Quigley mentioned, we're noticing that. And that's coming from our caseworkers, that's coming through the court process, and then also the court outcomes.
Mr. Bean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think success begets success. I think when the DCS workers start to recognize that this is working, I think that will help. That's purely anecdotal, but I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see this. And we are so appreciative that you share your information, because Tamara provided information about the number of children that are placed with family members in family or ICWA compliant placements. And it was impressive, the percentage.
Laura, a question for you. Have you guys started qualitative data, doing interviews? And if you haven't, are you planning to do that in the future, you think?
So we have not, or at least I have not as part of this project, but I have for other projects, and I think it's really powerful. So doing a process evaluation, so not just looking at outcomes, but the process itself. So for other courts, we have done courtroom observations to kind of document what's happening in the courtroom, but also doing exit interviews and transcribing those. And I would be so excited to do that for ICWA Court in Pima County. So I think, you know, having that voice, having those stories is very powerful. You know, numbers mean a lot and they demonstrate impact, but kind of that really deeply rich narrative is so powerful to include.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left, and I just want to be, if their audience has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I see we've had some before, and we're trying to incorporate those on the questions as well. I appreciate everybody adding to this. But one of the last questions I have is kind of related to what we've been talking about. I want to know, do you guys feel like, and we'll go down the panel right here, or if you want to respond to something else that's been said earlier, please do that as well. But has ICWA Court been a success? And if it has, how do you measure that success? Like, tell us what data points would you point to and tell me that is a success. And so that's the question that I have for you is tell us about that intervention, and then tell us maybe if I was going to start an ICWA Court tomorrow, what are some things that you would suggest for me to measure? What are some things that I need to measure? So thoughts on that?
I would say, Sheldon, that it has been a success. I think just the starting with the general openness, the collaboration, you know, the court process doesn't have to be as adversarial. We have mutual interest. We live in the same community. You know, our relatives are connected. Even though some of our children are tribal, we live in the Tucson community, Pima County, and so that's important. That develops trust. That develops a system-wide collaboration where everybody's struggling for resources and trying to figure out how to serve these families. The more we can work together, the better we're going to be able to serve our families. That communication is important to establish right at the outset. That's going to help our communication in court. It's going to ultimately help our families. I would say that just on that alone, I would measure it as a success. And it's a success because our families feel that, the kids feel that who are in care. And I guess as a court practitioner, maybe that's not what we feel all the time when we're involved in cases that are, you know, that are really impacting our families. So I think it's important. The respect that the county court has shown the tribe is important. The humility that's been part of the process, the learning, them understanding that they might not understand what they think they understand. Going into the process with that approach is important for all the jurisdictions working together. Getting consent, consulting with tribes, making sure that we're open. All that process has really been incredible to be a part of. And I know that it's making an impact in our community and with our kids, most importantly.
Thank you. And maybe that's not necessarily represented in any data report that we have right now. So I appreciate you bringing up all those aspects. Anybody else to that question?
I'm going to echo what Mr. Vina said. I absolutely think that it has been a success. One of my goals, though, is and it focuses on the data, is to look at our data, always kind of improve what kind of data we're collecting. We're working next, I think, on the ICWA compliant placement to really show data there and to show the improvements. I hope that we're able to do that. I do think it's really important to develop, this is not the data piece, but it's the culture of humility informs the data piece, because if the attorneys and the judges that work on this understand the cultures and traditions and histories and can use that in how you work with the families in cases, I think it can make a difference and result in better data. I think it's important to look to build the trust and maintain that trust. And one of my really strong goals is that our ICWA collaborative continues. I do not want this to be something that when one of us retires or has to leave, that this ICWA court goes away. I think this should be something that's instilled in this court, embedded in this court, and continues on. So I'm a huge proponent of that, and I think that if the more we build trust with the tribes and nations we work with, the better our data will be, the better, as Mr. Urbina pointed out, the families will feel, and that's what we want. We want healthy families together to raise their children. We don't want them in the system. That is not where these children should be if we can help it at all.
The other piece, Sheldon, the other piece to that is racial equity, is having the idea of justice and the concept of justice. Pima County has been a leader with this. They had a project where they looked at their delinquency cases and they measured race and how many kids were being held in custody. That project was a huge success, but they've had historical leadership in this area. And so you want to have an idea that the court is fair, the court is just, it's going to be treating tribal families fairly. You can't do that without evaluating your numbers, without understanding how your cases impact the community and the impact it has on certain segments of your community. And if you're not aware of that, you're not looking at your process, you're not looking at the impact you're having on the community. The Pima County Juvenile Court has been a leader across the country in doing that. This is another component of that, and it's gonna create change across the country.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you circling back to that. It sounds like if I've seen a pattern here, and I'm Native, I like to think of circles all the time. I see this pattern of cultural humility informs what aspects you're going to collect, and then you're collecting those aspects and circling back around to the community that you're serving to have that be informed. And it's always this process of going around that. Am I understanding that correctly? I've seen some. Okay. I appreciate that, Laura. We're at the very end. So if there's any final thoughts, I do understand you guys just recently won an award. Congratulations on that for your success. But any closing thoughts by anybody?
I just wanted to say that from the last question real quick, that when it comes to data, I think also including tribal engagement and that relationship, if it's, that qualitative data and how that impacts the data. So it'd be nice to have that as well included into the data, Laura and Rachel, which I think you guys are working on that, but looking at that, the tribe's relationship. And thank you guys for allowing us to be here. It was really great.
Yes, and speaking to Christina's point, a lot of the tribes, they may not necessarily formally intervene in our ICWA court cases, but they'll still participate. They'll send tribal caseworkers to the court hearings and still have them involved. And even though they're not necessarily a formal intervener, they are still part of the court process. And that's another collaboration that we've worked on through our ICWA Court Collaborative and adding them to our calendar system to share that information, the virtual hearings, and having a way to track, how many times tribes are participating in these ICWA Court hearings as opposed to intervening, because they're still participating in a different way. So certainly, you're absolutely right, Sheldon, that the circle goes on. We work with each other, share information, and look at ways we can improve, help, and support each other and the families in the community that we serve. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and presenting today.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your guys' time and you guys sharing your valuable information with us. And so if you're interested in attending some of those trainings that they're offering, reach out to me and we'll make sure we get them to you guys. So thank you so much. We'll catch you on the flip side, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheldon.
Yep. Thank you, Fred. Appreciate it. Thank you, Judge Quigley and Christina and Laura and Rachel.
So